What is your take on the U.S.'s actions tonight?
Well, very carefully coordinated, very thoughtful response, significant military action, far higher than we've seen in the tit-for-tat responses over the last several months. It was an impressive display of air power. I mean, those B-1 supersonic bombers were flying 13,000 miles round trip, all of them appearing over the target in 30 minutes, none of them being lost to enemy action. Most of it standoff precision strike missiles, I'm sure, and probably targeted principally on the Revolutionary Guard Quds Force. So I think the Biden team, very thoughtful, experienced people, Secretary Blinken, Austin, whole of government response, more to come, tiered response, very effective.
Now, let's talk about the tricky diplomacy ahead. Secretary of State Blinken is going back to the region next week. He's got a whole bunch of stops: Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Qatar, Israel, and the West Bank. How does he approach these talks after these strikes?
This only strengthens the United States' hand in the region right now. It not only is it a show of force and strength, but it reminds bad actors in the region that the United States will hold others accountable when they come after U.S. personnel. Now, the challenge, of course, is the United States has folks and military bases in Saudi Arabia, in Qatar, and, of course, Israel on the other side of the Persian Gulf is our other ally. All of that is about boxing in Iran in this moment. So Israel also having launched some of its own strikes against Iranian military forces. This is going to be an opportunity to really bring folks to the table and think about what would a solution, a two-state solution, something meaningful do to bring Saudi Arabia and Israel together to finally get that peace deal and potentially have everyone unified in pushing back against Iran's forces.
Peter, for people who are not following this closely, connect what's going on with these Iran-backed groups with what happened on October 7th.
Right. Well, of course, Hamas was...
Peter?
Sorry. So Hamas, which launched the terrorist attack on October 7th, is like these other groups backed by Iran. This is part of the axis of resistance across the region. And there's a question, of course, of how directly Iran is dictating specific actions, but at the very least, they are supplying weapons, they're supplying material and resources to Hamas and these other groups. These other groups are taking action against American and Israeli and other allied targets in the last 4 months in response to what they say is Israel's illegitimate operation against Gaza. And there's, the Houthis in the Red Sea, these militias in Iraq and Syria attacking American forces. It's all connected to the war between Israel and Hamas right now. And that's why this hostage deal that Secretary Blinken and others in the administration are trying to broker is so critical, because they believe that they can negotiate a deal between Israel and Hamas to pause the fighting for as long as 6-8 weeks, something longer perhaps, in order to get the hostages that Hamas has held since October 7th out. That would not only quiet the war between Israel and Hamas for a while, it would probably quiet these proxy wars that are going around the region as well. Because during the last ceasefire, 7 days in November to release some of the hostages, the other groups like the Houthis and the militias in Iraq and Syria also stood down for a while.
Now, the U.S. struck Iran's best-known military unit, the Revolutionary Guard. What do we need to know about them, and help us understand how Russia fits into all this?
Oh, well, Iran has been supplying Russia with drones that then Russia uses on the war in Ukraine. It's the same type of drone that was used that killed the American forces in Tower 22. The fact that these strikes, retaliatory strikes, were in Syria and Iraq also go to the balance of power and who else is trying to gain a foothold in the region. Russia has been involved in extensive ways in propping up the regime in Syria, certainly taking advantage of the chaos in Iraq, which after 20 years of having been in that Iraq war, we are still dealing with militants active over there. We use the term proxies for Iran, but Iran calls them their resistance revolutionary forces. So there's an ideology that is driving all of this activity against the United States.
General, could the U.S. be in a situation where we're fighting multiple groups in the Middle East? You've got the militias Iran supports in Iraq and Syria, plus others.
Well, no question. We're in a very low-grade regional war. It's primarily orchestrated, coordinated by Iran, funded by Iran, training, active leadership participation by senior officers of the Quds Force. The question is, how do we keep it bounded? I think one of the challenges that the White House now has to think through in the coming months, our presence in the region in Iraq, 2,500 some odd troops and another 900 in Syria, maybe a couple 3,000 in Jordan and elsewhere, we claim is an anti-ISIS force, a Sunni Muslim terrorist group fighting against, in Iraq, what is primarily a group of Shia militias and a Shia army, backed by Shia Iran. So I don't think this war, I agree with Peter Baker completely. The Gaza conflict, which is now out of control, has fueled a lot of the anger and resentment, particularly on the Arab street. But when Gaza fighting is stopped, and it will stop probably within a month or so, the question will remain, is Iran still trying to be a hegemonic power in the Middle East, both militarily and politically? And the answer is yes. So we got to think through the day after the war starts.
And why do you think that fighting in Gaza is going to stop within a month or so?
The Israelis are beleaguered by anger, international condemnation. They are losing the information war. I think if they keep fighting another few weeks, they will add to the pressure on the Hamas brutal, despicable leadership that killed and abducted and tortured and raped and murdered their own citizens. But they're going to have to stop fighting. It's an economic problem for the Israelis. They had at one point 500,000 reservists called up. They're backing off that. They've achieved a lot of their aims. But here, again, the questions are political, not military. Who is going to govern Gaza? It's not going to be the Palestinian Authority, corrupt and incompetent. The Israelis will never live with Hamas coming out of hiding and rebuilding for the next time. So where's the pan-Arab solution, the economic and political and military security governance of Gaza going to come for? That's what poor Secretary Blinken, with all his brilliance and experience, has got to help sort out.
Peter, the White House is very clearly messaging that they hope to stop attacks in the region without escalation. But is that a realistic goal? This is extraordinarily complicated.
Well, it is. Look, yes, obviously you don't know for sure. They're trying to calibrate it. They're not actually hitting targets inside Iran. They're hitting targets at night after having telegraphed it for several days. So presumably there were not a lot of actual casualties, but they're trying to make a point. And the question is whether they have hit them hard enough and will hit them hard enough in whatever future strikes happen over the weekend, let's say, to make that point and to deter Iran from and its proxies from continuing what they've been doing. The history suggests that hasn't worked so far. So we'll see. The question is whether it escalates. I mean, I think that they've been careful enough that you don't see the obvious predicate for Iran to launch a full-scale war. And American intelligence says they don't want a full-scale war against the United States. So they probably avoided that escalation ladder that the president is afraid of, has been concerned about. The question is whether or not it's hard enough, the strikes, that is, to deter future actions that have been so dangerous for American troops that cost the lives of the three servicemen over the weekend.
Nayyirah, the U.S. has already suggested that we are not planning to strike inside Iran. What do you make of that?
No, the idea of not escalating further is a key part of this. And there are other targets that the United States can also put into play. Iran has Navy vessels sitting in the Red Sea that are currently giving the Houthis the targeting information of how the Houthis can be the ones then to target American installations. So potentially that could be a next step. The idea of attacking inside Iran, though, would be considered more along the lines of what some of the John Boltons of the world are asking for, which is moves towards regime change. Iran at this point has not used proxies or launched an attack on U.S. soil, so that type of parallel is still important in this context.
Peter, the president was at the dignified transfer for those American soldiers that were killed in Jordan. That was just before the bombings took place tonight. Do you believe that these events happened on the same day for a reason? What's the message here?
Well, John Kirby, the National Security Council spokesman, says no, there was absolutely no connection whatsoever with the timing of today's service at Dover Air Force Base when they received the 3 bodies back. It just happened to be that this is the day that the military decided was most advantageous for an operation that's obviously been authorized now for several days. And what the Joint Chiefs said, that the staff of the Joint Chiefs said, is they chose now largely because of weather, that the weather was most advantageous at this point. Obviously, we can strike even in bad weather, but American, Air Forces have better, opportunities if the weather had cleared, and it had today, as far as they're saying. So I don't think it necessarily is connected. At least they're saying it's not connected. But the juxtaposition of the imagery, of course, is powerful, because you see the President of the United States and you see the military officers taking those caskets, taking those transfer cases off the plane, putting them in the van with flags draped on them today. It reminds you of what happened last Sunday and why it is that the Air Forces are striking those targets in Iraq and Syria today.
Before we go, let's take a quick look ahead. General, what do you expect to see next in terms of a U.S. military response? Could it be cyber attacks?
Well, first of all, I think the intelligence system is trying to track who did we get. They all went to ground. They all hid in holes. They turned off their radios, their radars. Within 48 hours, I'll have a better view of who moved and where they are now. I don't think the attacks are going to stop. This will be multi-phased. They're going to be quite careful, as Peter pointed out. Look, they didn't strike Hezbollah. They didn't strike inside Iran. They didn't even strike the Houthis. There was some Carrier Eisenhower shot down some Houthi drones, but they were not part of this so-called retaliation measure. So they're not off the hook. I think they're going to try and degrade capabilities to attack U.S. forces in the region. They'll largely accomplish that task before they stop.